Hi, I'm Phil. I'm a psychotherapeutic counsellor and a trauma therapist. Today I'm going to talk about anxiety and how and why your anxiety might be more in control of your behaviours than you think. So, this is part one of a two-part discussion that will look at these behaviours in detail, just so you can get a good sense of what might be influencing you to act and feel like you do. So, many of us will have some awareness that if we were to find ourselves in a dangerous situation, that our brain will typically choose to fight, flight, freeze, appease, or collapse as a way to survive that situation. It's a sort of pre programmed response that we all have, and whichever one is default for us depends on who we are as a person. And I'll just use fight or flight to describe this process from now on rather than reeling off the whole list. So, what I'm suggesting in this video is that how we respond to any increase in anxiety usually links into whichever fight or flight reaction is default for us, and that even when we're experiencing lower levels of anxiety, that this default response might still be subconsciously influencing us to make lower level behavioral changes that we might not have any control over or awareness of because they'll just feel like things we should be doing, ways that we should be acting. And this is because our defensive programming or our fight or flight, it's got the capacity to subconsciously override or influence our decision making process. And the more anxiety we've got in our system, the more it's going to be doing that. So we also need to be mindful that we're all unique. So some people's responses to anxiety might come from more than one fight or flight strategy. But one thing that's usually pretty certain is that the lower our anxiety levels are, then the more options we're usually able to give ourselves in stressful situations. And this is because we've simply got more access to logical thinking when we're not hypervigilant or highly stressed. So, a simple way to look at this is that if we've experienced trauma or had a buildup of anxiety that's reaching extreme levels, then we might be here on the anxiety scale. And our tipping point, which is when our subconscious takes over and responds with its default fight or flight behaviors, might be here. So it's not going to take too much to tip us into or over that tipping point, which means that we might have a trauma level reaction to a relatively small incident. So having less anxiety in our system, it gives us a bit of a buffer zone between our current anxiety level and our tipping point. And this buffer zone gives us a chance to logically assess the situation and choose an adequate response rather than going into a full-on trauma reaction. So in effect, the level of buffer zone that you have to play with is going to largely determine how you react behaviorally to day-to-day situations. And every bit of anxiety we encounter messes with that buffer zone. And also, the trouble is that it's difficult to know just how much buffer zone we've got to play with and what's a healthy level of anxiety. And this is going to be especially difficult for people who've had to deal with stressful or abusive childhoods or have been involved in some sort of traumatic incident, because it's likely that they're going to have normalized the high levels of anxiety that they feel every day, which means that they might have little to no awareness of just how close they are to their tipping point all of the time. So, understanding our behaviors might help us with this because our behaviors are a great indicator of just how stressed we are. So, if we could work to understand how rational or necessary they are in relation to our current situation, then we can work to challenge or adapt them. So, now I'll discuss the behaviors that people who have fight and flight as a default reaction to trauma might exhibit if their anxiety starts to climb. Excuse me. And in the next video, I'll do the same with freeze, appease, and collapse. But we do need to be aware that our fight or flight defenses are there for a good reason. So any changes that you might consider making to your behaviors need to be done with this in mind, which means that it's useful to make logical assessments and plan any behavioral changes that you might make towards adapting. Because sometimes the warning signs that your brain is sending you about your current situation, they're going to be true. So we don't want to be ignoring our senses completely, just challenging them and analyzing them a little bit more. So I'll start with the fight defense. So if people go into a trauma level fight response, then the only option their brain is going to give them at that point is to fight. And to help them along with this, their fight response is going to hand over the running of their emotional system to their ego, which is going to replace their capacity to experience fear, shame, guilt, empathy, compassion with anger, so they can fight to survive with confidence without a fear of consequence. So that means that if we have fight as our default response, then as our anxiety rises and our buffer zone, diminishes, our ego functioning is going to increase to override our more vulnerable feelings. So this means that we're likely to start feeling the urge to avoid intimacy, which means that we might start to present as colder or show less emotional interest in the people who are close to us. It's also likely to make us less considerate, more stubborn, more resistant to being told what to do, We might even feel a stronger need to be more in control of people and situations. And because our ego is beginning to prioritize anger over our other emotions, then we're typically going to start to feel more irritated, short tempered, and less tolerant of others in general. And the fear in the background that's driving the fight defense, that's going to be making us feel levels of paranoia around the intentions of others. And that means that we might start to interpret innocent glances, movements, or suggestions, or even humor as threats, and easily become confrontational in response. Or we might start to project, which means that we might start to think that somebody's going to attack us. So we might do a preemptive strike. And then we'll probably become more reactive to people entering our personal space or driving too close to us or even touching our possessions. So, in effect, the more anxious we get, the more reactive we get to the behaviors of others, and the less we begin to care about the impact of our behaviors on them. But the higher level of ego functioning might also have the positive effect of increasing our confidence. And also, we're going to have this elevated need to survive that's been driven by the fight process. And that might be transposed or converted into a need to succeed. So we might start being more driven to success, or we might become more ambitious. But as our anxiety levels get closer to our tipping point, then our methods of meeting these ends might become more aggressive or desperate. And we're probably not going to be able to handle failure very well either, not if the ego's in charge. Sorry. So we might also have appetite changes. So we might start to crave or feel the impulse to ingest energy sources like sugar, caffeine, nicotine, or anything else that might be stimulating. So that means like harder drugs might also be something we start to yearn or crave for. We could even start craving dopamine fixes that might assist us to convert our fear into stimulation. So this could mean that we might feel a draw towards more sexual activity or risky or dangerous pastimes or a bigger need to fight, which would be the adrenaline junkie way of managing high anxiety, which isn't an optimal survival response, as even alpha creatures in the wild, they only fight when they need to because they know that the more fights they have, the more chance they have of being killed. So if we're fighting when we don't need to, then we're taking unnecessary risks with our life. And because our ego's overriding our fear, we aren't going to be caring too much about that consequence. And apart from the risk of harm to self, the ever growing lack of fear around consequence, that's that means that we could be drawn into illegal or immoral activities because there's just going to not be the fear there to stop us. And so that could get us into financial situations or into a legal disputes. And these are things that we might not be drawn towards if we had more access to fear in our system, which of course we aren't going to have if anger's running the show. So alcohol can also be turned to in an effect to almost anesthetize adrenaline, but there's always the risk that that might have the opposite effect and make people in fight feel more vulnerable. So they might then lose and be more likely to lose control and attack. So now I'll move into flight. So a trauma level reaction of flight, that would make it impossible for us not to try to escape a situation that we're perceiving could kill us. So, at low levels of anxiety, this might make us unconsciously start to feel a level of uncomfortableness around certain people and situations. And that's going to make us feel the urge to put distance between ourselves and them. And because our anxiety levels are increasing, then we're going to more likely be interpreting more things as threatening. So we might start to become more jumpy and reactive to things in general. So any sudden movements in your proximity might be like a starter pistol going on off in your head. We might also start to experience levels of claustrophobia that are going to influence us to avoid situations or places that we might be perceiving are going to be hard to escape, because this is about flight. So flight is escape. So planes, trains, lifts, concerts, shops, anything that's sort of confining might start to feel more dangerous. But we also might start feeling more avoidant of relationships or work environments too, which is going to give us the urge to get away from people and situations that might not have felt so constricting before. So we might become more avoidant of relationships. So sleep might also start to become a problem because a flight defense needs to be ready to make a quick getaway at all the times. So it's not likely to be wanting to attribute too much time to being unconscious and aware of its surroundings. Like it's probably not going to be drawn to hobbies or pastimes that involve relaxation either. So whether you're at work, in relationships, or just dealing with life in general, It's going to be hard to relax and stay more in the moment when your process is unconsciously inviting you to feel that you need to be away from wherever you are or whoever you're around. You might just feel that uncomfortableness in your body, just a need to escape. So a flight response might also influence appetite changes. So that could send us cravings for foods or substances that are stimulating because flight uses a lot of energy and your brain's probably going to be wanting you to be fully fueled and ready for flight at all times. So we could also feel the urge to exercise more excessively because that will sort of appease the subconscious need to run. But if we're not resting adequately, then we could burn out or end up with an injury because a flight defense is going to keep us running through the pain. So I'm going to end this video here and I'll discuss the behavioral elements of freeze, appease and collapse in the next video. Then I'll do a bit of a summary regarding some of the obstacles that might get in the way of change. And hopefully you found this useful. And if you want to know a little bit more about any elements of it in general, just drop me a message in the comments and I'll see if I can do you a short video. Well, thanks for watching and take care. Goodbye.